Falls Church News Press for the last 25 years, but I'm on this panel as a representative of the Democratic National Committee's LGBT Advisory Board and also the LGBT Democrats of Virginia. The question about how do we carry the movement forward, I would start by saying everybody memorize that Martin Luther King speech, or at least internalize the spirit of that speech. The movement for LGBT rights that exploded in the late 1960s and early 70s in conjunction with the great advances in the civil rights movement was led up to by a group of courageous people, 8 of whom were at that speech, that Martin Luther King speech. And it informed their sentiment that they took forward. And myself, as a seminarian in the mid-60s, I thrived on the speeches and the words of Martin Luther King, who said, basically, if you're not bending over, nobody can push you down. And that was one of the more important, meaningful statements to me in that period of time. I went on to found the first chapter of the Berkeley Gay Liberation Front in the early 1970s, and found from that time forward that this is not, as another person said, an even, smooth movement to equality. On the contrary, the arc of justice bends forward, but as Martin Luther King said, it depends upon our efforts to push it forward to make it happen. It doesn't automatically happen by itself. We went from a society whose dominant theme was the substance of the Martin Luther King 1963 speech that you just heard, to, by the mid-1980s, the keynote speech of the nation was Gordon Gekko's speech, "Greed is Good," from the movie Wall Street. And the big question is, how did that happen? Gains were made in civil rights and progress and everything else, but at the same time, there was the pushback, the other way, and it's always been that way. There's been a struggle back and forth. Now, after having one of the most significant inflection points in our history being the election of Barack Obama, 2008, 2012, a huge pushback has now just happened. And we're in the midst of that and the significant what that's going to mean with the new administration that's coming in. So the name of the game really hasn't changed in all this time. It's just a matter of how hard do we push. And I think that everybody is inspired by the most recent events to realize we have to push really hard. And that's every one of us. My last point would be that every statewide office in Virginia right now is held by a Democrat. 11 legislative offices, districts in Virginia that were carried by even Hillary Clinton this last November are now being held by right-wing Republicans at the state level. The big question is, how do we fix that problem? It means we have to get out and go out and talk to people and work, and face-to-face contact and conversations with people is what's going to make the difference.
Hello?
They have values. They have a certain hunger that derives from the idea that they're striving to stick to values. It's a very positive impulse in younger people, and even the ones behind the millennials, whatever they're going to be called, according to the surveys, they even have a higher sensibility to want to identify with certain values, and words like empathy arise. We have catered to a mentality that justifies selfish self-interest. We too often try to frame a campaign or a speech in terms of how are you going to want to buy into this? What's in it for you, you personally, your neighborhood or your street, that kind of thing. And I think what there's a hunger for out in the country is what's in the interests of the wider interest. The scariest word from the standpoint of the ruling class that was uttered here today is one word, and I don't know if you guess what it is, solidarity. The tactic of the ruling class has always been the simplest tactic of all: divide and conquer. Turn people against each other. Turn neighbor against neighbor, neighborhood against neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. The reason the term solidarity was developed initially because the labor movement represented a counterforce to that, where you would get people to come together. And that's what Martin Luther King did that was so dangerous in the minds of the ruling class, was when he started getting involved in the anti-war movement, he started getting involved in the labor movement on top of the civil rights movement. And that's, the key. We have to go. I think we have to make demands on these millennials and the ones coming after them, not in asking them of things they don't want to have to participate in, but in fact showing them that what they're hungering for is exactly what we're demanding of them: a greater sense of solidarity, a greater sense of community, and a greater sense of acting for a higher good just in their own personal selfish self-interest. Because they're not going to get anything other than that on the television or anywhere else. The whole culture of our society today is geared towards appealing to selfish self-interest. And we have to start preaching, we have to start organizing campaigns around a different kind of morality.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. This has been an amazing program today, and I think that bringing together such a diverse group of people, diversity in terms of